It's going to go over the missile silos. The missile silos are going to be closed unless you decide you want to launch a missile at the time. They're not going to get anything they couldn't get from orbit. But it's an opportunity for us to put a slow-flying spy plane above it and a spy helicopter below it, get whisper sensors on it from the ground, and track for the next 9 days. And in those 9 days, we figured out how they were transmitting commands to it over satellites and over the civilian network, where those commands came from, not the city, not the building, not the floor, not the office, the specific IP address of the computer involved. And that allowed us to track every individual person who was involved in the process, as well as get a complete copy of their encryption keys. We got more information out of China in those 9 days and the days since than we have in the last 30 years. It was the intelligent coup of the decade. We now know that Xi was unaware of it. We now know that the Chinese military was unaware of it. It was just something in the Chinese Intelligence Bureau who thought this is what it meant to stick it to the Americans. And he dealt China the biggest geopolitical blow they have felt this century. And all we had to do was sit there and watch and listen. This is what state collapse looks like. The incapacity of a government to be aware of what its dumbest members are doing. Oh, we'd be first,
I know you consult with Langley, some and some others.
Yeah, we'd be first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. The United States has more offensive hacking capacity than the rest of the world's governments combined. It's just that we're not flashy about it, and we're not doing espionage in the traditional way. We're not trying to steal corporate secrets and then give them to Ford. We're simply hacking everybody's networks every single day so that when the hammer does drop, we have the ability to get into everything all at once. The Chinese obviously are focused more on corporate theft than anything else, and we're not great at defending against that, but it's not the same tool. So we would probably take down their computer and their electricity networks in a matter of hours, if not days, and then it would remain off for this foreseeable future. They would have to basically de-digitize their entire system and work without computers that were networked in any way in order to fight back against what we were capable of doing. And again, 4 years ago, they knew that. That's the number one threat. There's this number two threat that's rising rapidly. So let me deal with both of them because unfortunately they do interact. The status of the cartel wars is that the Sinaloa cartel, the big one that has dominated most of the drug trafficking in the United States, is breaking up. We got El Chapo, we removed him from the equation. There are now a half a dozen leaders battling out for supremacy, and it's kind of fallen apart as an organization. And the new organization that is kind of rising to take their place is called Jalisco New Generation. They are much more violent, but so far they have not succeeded in getting a foothold in the plazas, much less north of the border. And as long as that is the case, then the violence from the drug war is mostly south of the border. If they do cross north, they're not going to have this business-oriented mindset that Sinaloa has had, where they don't go after American citizens as a rule. They will go in and they will shoot sheriffs and bomb police centers, and we'll have a very, very different conflict on our hands. And we will almost overnight think of things like trade in Mexico in a very different light. Hasn't happened, doesn't mean it will happen, but that is my concern. The second thing that I'm really concerned about is the existence of Donald Trump in this presidential election at all. He has a lot of ethical baggage. He's already been voted out once. He's now campaigning under indictment, and a plurality of the people who identify themselves as Republican will follow him to the end. And as long as that is the case, the Republican Party is no longer the party of math and maps and business and national security and rule of law. And that is a loss. I have always considered the Republicans to be the adults in the room, and now they're being just as ignorant as stupid as the far left has always been. And that has changed the nature of the political conversation. And it means that the other factlessness that we're used to seeing out of the more socialist wing of the Democratic Party has now come for the single largest wing of the Republican Party. And that makes it very difficult to have a political conversation in this country. And that, unfortunately, looks like it's going to fuse with the drug war. One of the conversations going on in the hard right is that we should use our military to attack the cartels within Mexico. Let me start by saying that if we could drop a 500-pound bomb on something in Mexico to end the drug war, we would have done that 40 years ago. It's a much bigger problem than that. And even if we succeed in taking out all of the leadership of all of the cartels, that doesn't change the nature of the drug war. It just makes it more violent as different factions fight for dominance. Keep in mind that these are not terrorists. Terrorists use violence as a mean to a political end. They have a political goal in mind. Cartels are businesses after a fashion. They are responding to the factors of supply and demand, and taking out the leadership doesn't change the supply or the demand. In addition, we would be limited in our strikes to where we could actually reach. Most American military capacity, especially things like special forces, couldn't reach as far south as Mexico City. We would have to focus on the border zones and the northern border states. The northern border states are our best friends on the planet. They are more pro-American than most American politicians. These are the people that are integrated into NAFTA supply chains. Politically, economically, socially, culturally, they are on our side. And if we bomb them, they won't be anymore. Disrupting the trade links of NAFTA by using military tactics in the northern states would destroy the world's most efficient supply chains and the only supply chains in the world that we are actually dependent upon. That would cost the average American somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 a year in lost GDP per capita, probably double that in Texas and probably triple that in Houston. It would be the single dumbest thing that we are capable of doing, and that's dominating the conversation in the Trump wing of the Republican Party right now. And that is idiotic, and that is dangerous, and that is self-destructive, and that is where we are. Largest exporter of light sweet crude. Our net export position makes us like the number 3 or number 4 exporter in the world now. So you disrupt a little bit of stuff coming to the United States is no big deal. The Iranians now have grabbed 6 tankers, if memory serves. Only one of those had crude that was coming to the United States. The rest were going various other places. And even that one tanker was neither US owned nor US flagged. In the end, all of those tankers were ultimately released. Basically what's going on is the Iranians are trying to get the Americans' attention to renegotiate the deal that came from the Obama administration. If you remember that way back when, there's really no interest in the US administration to do that. There's an interest in having a better relationship, but we're certainly not going to give the kind of concessions that they got when they were on a relative high. Any deal that the Biden administration is going to get with Iran will be far more crushing than anything that we've seen to this point. Little throwback memory, the people who came up with the idea of a deal with the Iranians to smooth America's exit from the Middle East, they were on the vice president's team at the time. They were Biden's people. Blinken was one of them. But then Obama's team ran the negotiations and did so very, very badly. So Team Blinken not only has an example of what not to do, they have their original ideas of how to make this work, and they are being very, very tough with the Iranians on it. If we're going to get a deal, it's not imminent, and it's not favoring the Iranians very well. But back to your broader question, the Chinese dependent upon the Americans guaranteeing freedom of the seas for free. And if that's no longer the case, China absolutely lacks the capacity to do that for itself. So to this point, because the crews weren't killed, because the tankers were ultimately released, the insurance folks were basically able to wave it away. There are specific clauses specifically for Iran in those contracts, and there's a grace period. We didn't go by any of the grace periods, but the real loser out of this is absolutely China.